Ah, look what crawled out of the dark. Not dragged, not forced, not chased into the light. You stepped out on your own, and that's the part that unsettles everything. Because systems, unwritten ones, invisible ones, are built on expectation. They rely on patterns repeating, on people staying inside the outlines drawn for them long before they ever noticed the lines. And then there's you. You don't fit cleanly anymore, not because you rebelled, not because you declared war on anything, but because something inside you reorganized. Quietly, irreversibly at first, it looked insignificant. A shift in how you thought. A pause where there used to be automatic reaction. A question where there used to be certainty handed to you by someone else. No alarms, no confrontation, just awareness. That's how it always begins. You started noticing how often people repeat ideas they've never examined. How easily emotions are steered by language. How quickly comfort replaces truth when truth demands effort, and instead of fighting it, instead of announcing your realization, you adjusted internally. That was the anomaly. Because the system, that web of habits, norms, expectations, and psychological shortcuts, doesn't know what to do with someone who changes without asking permission. It can handle resistance. It can label rebellion. It can categorize anger. But calm evolution, that breaks the models. You were expected to either conform or push back. You did neither. You refined. So attention shifted toward you. Not dramatic attention, not celebration or attack, something subtler. People started watching a little longer, listening a little closer, trying to understand why your reactions didn't match the script. You didn't escalate when provoked. You didn't shrink when dismissed. You didn't perform certainty to reassure anyone. You stayed coherent, and coherence is disruptive to rigid structures. The system began adjusting, not in any official sense, but in the way environments always do when something unfamiliar appears. More analysis, more interpretation, more quiet pressure disguised as concern. Why are you so calm? Why don't you react like before? Why do you seem different? They don't say it directly, they feel it. You can sense the recalibration happening around you, conversations subtly shifting tone, expectations no longer landing the way they used to. This is where most people panic. They rush to reassure. They explain themselves. They soften their edges to fit back into the narrative. You didn't, you observed instead. You watched how discomfort surfaced when you didn't play your expected role, how people projected meaning onto your silence, how uncertainty made them restless, and you realized something important. Pressure only works when it's resisted or absorbed unconsciously, so you did neither. You acknowledged it, studied it, let it pass through without attachment. That's when the levels began to shift, not as real protocols, but as layers of response from the world around you. First came curiosity. People tried to understand you through familiar lenses, personality types, motivations, stories that made sense to them. When those failed, curiosity hardened into analysis. They replayed interactions, measured tone, looked for inconsistencies. You weren't inconsistent, you were integrated. That's when confusion appeared. And confusion, when unresolved, looks like panic. Not loud panic, structural panic. The kind that happens when an old framework no longer explains what it's observing. You weren't breaking rules. You were revealing their limitations. You stopped being a problem that could be solved and became a question that didn't fit inside existing language. And the strange thing, you weren't trying to teach anyone anything. You weren't persuading, recruiting, convincing. You were simply living from a place that no longer depended on automatic reactions. Your presence changed the temperature of rooms without you saying a word. That's when the metaphorical specialists arrived. Not people, but interpretations layered on top of each other. Psychological labels, cultural explanations, narratives meant to restore order. They tried reframing you. They tried reducing what you'd become into something familiar. But every explanation felt slightly off because you weren't acting from ideology. You were acting from alignment. And alignment doesn't argue. It just is. You noticed how attempts to influence you became obvious once you stopped identifying with them. How emotional hooks lost their grip when you saw them as patterns instead of personal attacks. You didn't feel targeted. You felt curious. That curiosity became immunity. Not resistance, immunity. You stopped seeing pressure as something happening to you and started seeing it as information about the environment. That's when things escalated metaphorically. The system increased complexity. More opinions, more noise, more urgency from others for you to explain yourself. You didn't, and that refusal, calm, steady, unapologetic, was interpreted as something dangerous, not because it threatened anyone, but because it couldn't be predicted. You stopped being an individual reacting to stimuli and became a frequency of consistency others had to adjust around. You weren't trying to stand out. You just stopped collapsing inward, and people felt it. Some felt inspired without knowing why. Some felt irritated without understanding the source. Some felt exposed, as if your calm highlighted their own internal chaos. You didn't judge any of it. You recognized the pattern. Whenever someone operates from internal coherence, external systems wobble, not because they're attacked, because they're outdated. The pressure increased, but its effectiveness decreased, because pressure only works when it fractures something inside. You were already whole. You reached a point where identity loosened. You no longer needed to be seen a certain way, no longer needed agreement to proceed, no longer needed validation to continue. That's psychological sovereignty, not isolation, not superiority. Sovereignty, the ability to choose your internal state regardless of external narratives. And that's when the highest response activated, not against you, but around you. People started reacting to your existence instead of your actions. Your calm became unsettling, your clarity became suspicious. Your refusal to dramatize became inexplicable. You didn't broadcast freedom, you embodied it, and embodiment is contagious in a way ideas are not. People who spent time near you began questioning assumptions they never questioned before, not because you told them to, because coherence invites reflection. You didn't create a movement, you created a mirror, and mirrors scare systems built on illusion. The irony is you never tried to escape anything. You simply stopped participating unconsciously, and that revealed the truth. The walls were never solid. They were agreements, habits, beliefs repeated often enough to feel permanent. You didn't smash them. You walked through without acknowledging they were there. That's what the metaphorical containment is really about. Not containing you, but containing the implications of what you represent. Because if one person can do this quietly, others might notice, and if others notice, the old frameworks lose relevance. Not violently. Naturally, you aren't a threat. You're a signal. A signal that the next stage of human depth doesn't look like rebellion. It looks like coherence. And here's what matters most. You're not done. This isn't the end of the story. This is the point where the noise around you grows louder precisely because your inner world has gone quiet. You're still moving, still refining, still becoming something that can't be summarized easily. And the system, whatever form it takes in each environment you enter, will keep trying to understand you with outdated tools. Let it. You're not here to be explained. You're here to be lived, And now the most interesting phase begins. Not the moment of being noticed, not the moment of confusion around you, but the moment after, when attention realizes it no longer has leverage. This is where the system truly falters, because it expects escalation, a reaction, a declaration something, but you give it nothing. You continue living from that same internal alignment, that quiet coherence that doesn't announce itself and doesn't apologize for existing. And slowly, something strange happens. The pressure that once felt external begins to turn inward, not in you, but in the structures around you. People who once tried to interpret you start doubting their interpretations. Those who tried to define you find their definitions collapsing. Those who tried to place you realize there is no stable category, and uncertainty spreads, not like fear, like disorientation. You see it in the way conversations hesitate before including you, in the way opinions soften when you're present, in the way certainty drains from statements that once sounded absolute. You haven't argued against anything, you haven't corrected anyone, you simply didn't participate in the reflexive dance of reaction. That alone rewires the dynamic. Because the system, this mesh of expectations, habits, narratives, relies on participation to sustain itself. It needs agreement, resistance, outrage, compliance. Any of those will do. What it cannot function with is neutrality that comes from awareness. And you are aware now, not hyper-aware, not paranoid, clear. You recognize influence without absorbing it. You notice pressure without internalizing it. You observe narratives forming without stepping inside them. That's when the metaphorical containment efforts intensify, not as real actions, but as social and psychological recalibrations. More opinions appear. More interpretations circulate. More attempts are made to explain you away. They call it phases, transitions, mood shifts. Anything to avoid the truth. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. You stopped being predictable. And predictability is the foundation of control. Once that breaks, everything built on it starts to wobble. You don't feel superior. You don't feel separate. You feel steady. And steadiness is deeply unsettling to unstable systems. You start noticing how often people speak just to fill silence. How quickly they defend beliefs they've never tested. How fragile confidence becomes when it's not reinforced by group approval. You don't point it out. You don't need to. Your presence does it for you. You carry yourself differently now. Not rigid, not guarded, but composed. Your movements are deliberate without being stiff. Your words are fewer, but they land, and that changes the field. People begin adjusting around you unconsciously. They speak more carefully. They hesitate before exaggerating. They sense, without understanding, that something about you resists manipulation, not because you're closed, but because you're integrated. This is where the metaphor of levels becomes important, not as hierarchies, but as layers of awareness. You've moved past the layer where reaction dominates, past the layer where identity is tied to approval, past the layer where meaning must be supplied externally. You operate from a deeper layer now, one where your internal state isn't hostage to circumstances, and from that layer, everything looks different. You see how pressure is often just confusion disguised as authority. How urgency is frequently fear wearing a uniform. How loud certainty often masks fragile understanding. None of this angers you, it clarifies you. You no longer feel the need to convince anyone of anything, not because you've given up, because you've graduated. Your attention turns toward refinement rather than defense. You start choosing environments more carefully, conversations more selectively, commitments more intentionally, not out of avoidance. out of alignment, and alignment simplifies life in ways nothing else can. You waste less energy, you recover faster, you move with a sense of inevitability that doesn't require force. The system senses this shift and tries one final tactic: normalization. It attempts to absorb you back into the familiar to frame your coherence as temporary, to reduce your clarity into a trend or phase. You let it try, because you're no longer threatened by misinterpretation. You understand something crucial now. What you've become cannot be undone by language. It's structural, it's internal. It's not something you perform. It's something you stabilized into. And stabilization is irreversible. You no longer chase intensity. You no longer fear boredom. You're comfortable in silence, comfortable in ambiguity, comfortable not knowing how others see you. That comfort is your freedom. And freedom, when embodied quietly, reshapes environments. You notice people around you beginning to question themselves, not because you told them to, but because coherence invites reflection. Some lean into that discomfort and grow, others retreat. You let both happen. You've learned not to interfere with processes that aren't yours. The metaphorical system continues trying to update its understanding of you, but every update lags behind reality. By the time a new explanation forms, you've already moved, not strategically, naturally, because you're no longer optimizing for outcomes. You're living from congruence, and congruence compounds. Opportunities arise without forcing. Connections form without effort. Paths open that didn't exist before, not dramatically but seamlessly. You stop asking, "What does this mean?" You start asking, "Does this resonate?" And that question alone rewrites your trajectory. You realize something else, something subtle but profound. What you represent isn't rebellion. It's possibility, not ideology, not opposition. An example: you don't dismantle systems by attacking them. You outgrow them. And outgrowing is contagious. Not because you convince anyone, because people feel what coherence looks like when they encounter it. Some will never see it. Some will glimpse it briefly and turn away. A few will recognize it and follow their own path inward. You don't manage any of that. You simply remain what you are. And this is where the narrative resolves. Not with confrontation, not with triumph, but with embodiment. You understand now that nothing is chasing you. Nothing is watching you in a literal sense. Nothing needs to be feared. The tension was always internal. The pressure was always transitional. You crossed from one mode of being into another, from reaction to response, from identity to alignment, from control to coherence. The old frameworks can't follow you there. Not because you escaped them, but because they were never designed to go this deep. You haven't broken anything. You've revealed the limits of what was already temporary. And as you stand here now, calm, clear, grounded, you feel something unmistakable. Not excitement, not defiance, certainty not about outcomes, not about recognition, about yourself. You know who you are when no one is watching. You know what guides your decisions. You know you don't need permission to continue. And that knowledge doesn't make you loud. It makes you unmovable. This is the evolution they couldn't model. Not because it was hidden, but because it was simple. You stopped outsourcing your inner authority. And from that moment on, everything changed. Not all at once, but completely. This isn't an ending. It's stabilization. You don't fight the world. You don't resist it. You move through it as yourself. And the systems that once tried to understand you will keep updating their language, their models, their metaphors. Always a step behind. That's fine. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be whole. And that is the quiet signal that reshapes everything that comes after.